Welcome to the Capitalist Corner. As you can see, Mark Pellegrino is once again conspicuous by his absence, but he has a very good excuse. He had to take Frankie to the veterinarian. As usual, remember to hit like, remember to share this episode from YouTube, and remember to go to AmericanCapitalistParty.org. And also, my show, The Rational Egoist, I should have a new episode coming out tomorrow or Thursday at the latest. And this is going to be an interesting episode because the philosopher Andrew Bernstein is going to be interviewing me concerning my book, View from a Cage. I am hoping we may get the presence of James Valliant for a brief period. I'm very interested to talk to him about something. I won't bring it up unless he joins and comes on. But we do have plenty to talk about, whether Jim joins us or not. Let me just go through the stack of stuff that I sent to Mark this morning, and we shall see if there is something to talk about. Well, the first thing is that I wanted to talk about is now Trump's tariffs that he is going to be putting on various countries in August. He was supposed to put them on this month, but now he's extended them to next month. And we also have the situation where he's now agreeing to send Ukraine Patriot missiles. He says they need to be defended. They need these weapons. My problem with, more so than that I disagree with the tariffs, the policy. And while I'm against giving Ukraine weapons, I'm not adamantly opposed to it. But what I don't like is the uncertainty of the whole thing, right? Because we have a situation where people just don't know if they can trust our government. If you're a businessman, you don't know if tariffs are going to go up, if he's going to, because he even said something to the effect of, I may extend the deadline again, and we may end up not having the tariffs when I say we're going to have them. So people just don't know how to invest, how to plan for the future. The same thing with our allies and our enemies. I mean, people just don't know what to expect from the United States of America. That is not a good thing. In order to function, we need to understand what is the likely consequence of our actions. Otherwise, we can't plan long term. And that's a necessity of our existence, is to be able to plan over the long term. So while I'm very much opposed to these tariffs, I think they're a terrible idea. I'm more opposed to the uncertainty that is put into play by Trump's implementation of these tariffs. But it also gets to the point, too, where we hear a lot of people saying, oh, why haven't these negative effects of the tariffs come in play yet? Well, for one thing, some of them, most of them haven't even been implemented. But we also have the situation where it takes a while for economic effects to cascade throughout the economy. So we wouldn't expect to have seen these effects yet anyways. So it looks like Jim may not be joining us. So I'm going to address the topic. And if you guys don't want to hear about this, just let me know in the chat and maybe I'll reconsider. But this Jeffrey Epstein thing has me absolutely fascinated. It's not something that interested me very much. What does interest me is the epistemology of the people that believe that there is a mass government conspiracy, or Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself, whatever. It's not that I think it's impossible that he was murdered. I don't. It's not that I don't think that there could have been a client list. I think there very much could have been. What I find interesting is the certainty with which people hold these views that yes, he had to have killed himself. Yes, there's a client list that is being covered up. Jim says I have to send him a link again. I'm going to do it right now, Jim. There you go. It works, Jim. Get on. So, I mean, if you stop, and let me just hope that Jim joins, and we'll give him a second, because I really, really want to get his take on this as somebody who has studied logic, epistemology, understands standards of proof, things of that nature, because it's very important. Now, if we stop and think, I don't mind skepticism, but I think what we have out there is faux skepticism, right? People say, well, I don't believe the government when they say there's no client list. I'm fine with that. But they did believe the government when the government said there was a client list, right? And this gets to the heart of the matter. So people say, the conspiracy-minded folks, that they distrust mainstream institutions, the mainstream media, the government. I'm perfectly okay with that. I think it's a legitimate stance to have. They both have not conducted themselves well. The government frequently feeds us half-truths and lies. So Jim keeps telling me to resend the link that I've already sent. Let me send it one more time and just see what happens here. Well, I sent it and sent it and sent it, so hopefully he gets it. But so if you go back to the whole beginning of this thing, right? How did we come to know that Jeffrey Epstein was committing these crimes, right? We found out because, one, the government charged him. Two, the media reported it, right? So where was the skepticism then? Where was the skepticism saying, oh, no, I don't believe this. I don't believe this guy committed these crimes. I think the media is lying. I think the government's lying, right? That is believed. The skepticism only comes into play when the narrative doesn't fit the preferred narrative. So, for instance, he dies in prison. It's claimed to be a suicide. No. That had to be a murder. So then any information that comes out that goes in favor of him being murdered is accepted, but any information that comes in that goes against the murder theory is pushed to the side. So when they were saying they're going to release these Epstein files, yeah, we're going to get the Epstein files. When they come out and say, no, there's no Epstein files, they don't believe the latter. So I actually asked somebody this morning that said to me, no, he said he or she, I'm not sure, but said that the government already admitted that there were these files. And I said, well, why did you believe that? And the answer was, well, when they first admit it and then deny it, I'm going to believe the first thing. And I'm just thinking, well, why? Why would you do that? I mean, if you look at the facts, they had motivation to lie and say there was this. They had a base to pander to. And I think what happens in a lot of these cases on the when it comes to folks like Dan Bongino, for instance, is there's a big difference when you're hosting a podcast and speculating than when you are actually in charge of the law, when you have serious consequences if you break the law. And it's similar. What it reminds me of is when Trump was claiming that the election was stolen, but let me just copy this one more time. But when they got into court, they didn't make that claim because now the lawyers would be on the hook. I don't know, Jim. I'm sending and sending and sending, and you're not getting on. Okay, go to phone. Jim says it's not showing up on his computer, only on his phone. I wonder if that's because I'm sending it from my phone. I don't know. But my point is that I've long believed that a lot of these folks are just massive grifters. And so it would make sense that they would push the grift when there's no consequence, but when there is a consequence, not push the grift. Alan Thomas says, personally, government narrative aside, the more important question that is being lost all of this, who else is a disgusting pedophile? Well, I don't know who else is a disgusting pedophile, Alan. The problem is, like I said, I haven't followed this case, but I have seen things over since yesterday. So I said, let me look into this a little more than I have because I wanted to get a decent take. And it turns out that neither Maxwell nor Epstein was charged with procuring minors for other people. It was all about Jeffrey Epstein. That's what they were charged with. That's what they were accused of. There's separate civil things, and there's been a lot of speculation. But in criminal matters, they've only been charged with getting people, for young girls, for sex with Epstein. Now, even if there is a massive conspiracy to procure these young girls for all kinds of famous people, that does not mean that they would have to have a client list. It also doesn't mean that there's some mass blackmail going on, right? But these are the conspiracies. Epstein is actually a Mossad agent, for instance. That's one of the big conspiracies. So my question, I guess, for the audience is, what is your standard of proof? How would you gauge this? I personally, I wouldn't say I know, because I don't. I don't make a positive claim on it. I just find it interesting that so many people are so certain that they know what is going on. And ultimately, what I always tell conspiracy theorists is skepticism is justified. Substituting your own narrative is not. So what do you think, audience? What's your take on this? Let me know. Let me see if I can't get Jim Valliant on here too. Let me copy this. There's a messenger. They won't let me do that, so I got to do that. Click this on. I know, folks. I know. It's very, very annoying. But I do want to get Jim on because I really, really, really want his take on this. So let's see if I can't get the man. I really don't. All right. All right, Jim. I sent it via computer, so hopefully you'll be getting it. Oh, there he is. Jim, you made it.
I have. Arrivé. Yes, I have.
All right, so now I'm going to Shanghai you with some questions.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is the Jeffrey Epstein thing, and how there may never have been a client list, right? People assume there was this client list, and there's been government people who have pushed the narrative and whatnot. But the thing that I find most interesting, and it's always the case with conspiracy theorists, is they're not actually skeptical, right? Their skepticism is directed where they want it to go, and then they put forward their own narrative. In that, they're completely gullible. And what my take on this is, how did we find out the folks that, complain about mainstream narratives? They don't like the mainstream narrative, which I'm fine with. I'm very suspicious of it myself. But how did we find out about this sex island of Jeffrey Epstein? Well, the government charged him, the government that everyone's so skeptical of, and the media reported it. So if you're truly skeptical of government and media and everything they say, then where was the skepticism then?
Yeah.
So now that I've given you a little background, I want your take on this. The Jeffrey Epstein thing.
Let's see. We know that he had maybe the most expensive mansion in New York City. He had this famous island. We know that people have made accusations against people like Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. There's allegations. I mean, we have this portrait of Bill Clinton in a dress, apparently. But if he was blackmailing people, why would you keep that list? I mean, you'd keep maybe the tapes that you were going to use to blackmail somebody, but there's a variety of celebrities who apparently flew on his plane, from Steven Spielberg to Tom Hanks. And, so that encouraged
Donald Trump.
Well, and in one sense, though, we've got to give Trump some credit. There's some evidence that he cooperated early on with it. But for any of these guys, the burden of proof is on the person who says that they were involved in the sexual activities going on. I think you pointed out correctly that it was Epstein and Miss Maxwell themselves who were charged with procuring for Epstein. Yeah. We still don't have any criminal charges about these other people. And what I would urge people to keep in mind is the burden of proof is on the person asserting some guilt, some involvement, that this person was involved, that Trump was involved, that Steven Spielberg was involved, that Tom Hanks was involved, that Hillary Clinton was involved, whoever the heck else was involved. The burden of proof in our own minds, forget the courtroom, right? In our own minds has to be on the person who asserts, okay, this person was involved in the sexual activities going on in Epstein's places. Now, Epstein was charged. Ghislaine Maxwell was charged. We don't have, when people are charged with the kind of things that Epstein was charged with, they are suicidal. I mean, there's a way of understanding suicide in that case. On the other hand, what caused me to be suspicious was the nature of the neck break from forensic evidence. That's an unusual neck break. Is it impossible? No. I think you've also pointed out that, come on, prison facilities always have breakdowns, guards falling asleep. But we do have a conjunction of events that have caused people to be suspicious. About what, though? About what, though? We have now two Justice Departments that have really blown off the idea of other people involved, and a Justice Department this time around that said, no, it was suicide. Now, all other things being equal, I have no reason to doubt that. The neck break is suspicious. The other circumstances, while understandable, are there. So that, of course, is going to feed the fire. But feed the fire of what? A belief in a mass conspiracy, a list that involves these specific people? We are not warranted epistemologically to say that the people that have been suspected of involvement, whether it's, Prince Andrew, I mean, it kind of looks weird because they got the picture of him coming out, a young girl and stuff. And there's civil lawsuits, I understand, that are involved in that. So let them go and prove that in court. But what is it epistemologically proof for? It's not proof for anything or any of these specific people. So hold on to your conspiracy, horses here, because we don't have proof that anyone, whether it was Donald Trump, Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, were actually involved in anything nefarious with Mr. Epstein. We do have evidence, I think, that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were procuring girls, and that's not cool. But for Mr. Epstein, could it have involved many other people? It could have. I guess it's this side of arbitrary, but we don't have any grounds to actually believe the wild conspiracy claims that people are making, at least not yet. Do I have an open mind about the involvement of other people, whether it's the Duke of York or the famous director and producer Steven Spielberg, or President of the United States Donald Trump? No. For each of those cases, we require evidence to establish that they were involved in something nefarious. The man was very well connected. Does everybody who uses plane instantly get convicted? I should think not. Now, is it suspicious, the circumstances of Epstein's death? Well, I suppose there's suspicions, but come on, as you point out, prison facilities often have major lapses. It's often perfunctory, the guards fall asleep. But when you put it all together, suspicious neck break, but the guy, when you're charged with that kind of thing, procuring underage girls, that is precisely the kind of thing that would put your career in a tailspin and make you suicidal. So I've got evidence on both sides here, and no specific evidence referring to anyone in particular. So until and unless there is, I am sorry, I can't go there with the conspiracy theorists that would point fingers at specific individuals and their involvement. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Somebody actually posted about this today, and I asked, how many people that have actually spent time in prison has he talked to about this? Because no one that's been in prison that I know thinks that he couldn't have killed himself.
Yeah.
I mean, really, nobody.
Yeah, come on.
I also asked,
folks, have you ever visited a federal detention facility or a state prison? Come on.
I also talked to somebody who was in that specific prison, and he said, no, there's no way. There's nothing even remotely unlikely about this. Now, Ian Gilmore asks about this camera that they say now they have video of something. I unfortunately don't know enough about. I know they've said they had a video, but I don't know if this video contradicts the earlier video, that they said there wasn't. I don't know. So for that's a good point. And
see the video and what it shows.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not
sneaking in and murdering him, or does it show the man committing suicide, or does it still show nothing?
Right, and I'm not suggesting that anybody just accept the government's position or what the government says. No. All I'm saying is, if you say, okay, I don't believe the government, then whatever you put in that place, if it's not just an I don't know, there ought to be some evidence or some proof for it, not just, it seems to me like a lot of times, let me just give you an example, Jim, within these circles, the online influencers, the libertarian influencers, the right-wing influencers, is they've got this echo chamber where each one confirms the other. So you've had this sort of circle that keeps going on and on and on. And now they're like, oh, what about all this we've heard? You've heard it from each other.
Right.
You're each making your claims. That doesn't make it true. It'd be like you and me. I say, yeah, this happened. And then you say, yeah, it happened. And we just keep going back and forth talking to each other
Right.
with no outside evidence.
Even if
there has to be something.
Even if you have a claimed eyewitness, we should treat that with skepticism until we have some corroboration of the eyewitness.
Because people lie. And people can be wrong. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously wrong.
Notoriously, people forget, memories get corrupted, et cetera, et cetera. People always say circumstantial evidence is inferior. Well, to what? The thing that is the opposite is direct evidence. I see an eyewitness account. But you get an eyewitness. Were you wearing your glasses? Do you have a bias? Were you drunk that day? What did you say previously? I mean, for gosh sake, give me physical evidence like fingerprints, DNA, footprints away from the crime, the stolen property on the guy's possession. Give me circumstantial evidence over direct evidence any day. But in any case, what we have here is nothing like the kind of physical evidence that I just described, like fingerprints or DNA or something. We have a lack of evidence. And in a lack of evidence, what you do is you say, I don't know. You don't say, aha, this is a conspiracy. I therefore know that this whole list of celebrities must have been involved in nefarious activities, until and unless we get actual evidence of someone's involvement in nefarious activities. It is bizarre and wrong epistemologically. And if you're making public allegations about someone, for God's sake, it's totally irresponsible. Are there certain suspicious circumstances? Yeah, he was procuring girls for himself. Okay, that's interesting. He committed suicide. But, as I say, guys who are charged with this kind of thing are, very commonly suicidal. It's not like, so we have evidence on the, but to believe, let's put it this way, that would lean us in the direction of it was a suicide. And that's what the government tells us it was. Do we have other evidence that gives a big question mark to it? Maybe so. But a question mark is a question mark. It is not affirmative knowledge. We still don't have affirmative evidence that he committed, that it wasn't suicide. Let me put it that way. When we have him strapped to, his neck strapped to something, I don't mean to be the grizzly like that. But the point is that we don't have these this is the way conspiracy thinking goes, right? They don't need to wait for affirmative evidence of positive involvement by anyone before they start pointing fingers and assuming, yes, it's a great conspiracy, ... And of course, the left is now, it's interesting how the left are now on this conspiracy train because Trump might have been involved. And see, Trump administration says there's no client list. Well, wait a minute, it was also investigated in the Biden administration, and still we had no evidence of that. So it's interesting how the conspiracy shifts. It was right-wingers who were pushing this conspiracy idea because, my gosh, it may involve Hollywood celebrities and Bill Clinton. But now that Trump is in office and it's his Justice Department telling us these things, aha, that must be proof that Trump is involved. Neither is the case. Neither is the case. Until we have affirmative evidence, we don't know. So just say, I get used to it. Say it out loud. Repeat it to yourself as sort of a daily affirmation. I don't know. If people could just get comfortable with that little phrase rather than leaping off into these wild conspiracy theories, I think would be a lot better off. People who I actually respect, commentators who I actually respect the opinion of, have said that the, quote, suspicious circumstances of Mr. Epstein's death is therefore grounds to believe that there's something nefarious going on. It is not. Suspicion is still just suspicion. You can't arrest someone on the basis of suspicion. Last I checked, as a prosecutor, you need probable cause. And probable cause is still just that. Probable cause. It doesn't refute any other possibility. But we're not even close to probable cause. We're at the bare level of, there's some curious circumstances. And what do curious circumstances about the man's suicide imply? About someone else? Nothing. Zip, zilch, zero.
Okay, so I want to tell you one thing, and then I got a quick question for you before you go.
Yeah.
So yesterday, somebody actually said to me on X, Michael, you don't have to be 100% certain before you report something. If you do that, you'll be waiting 5 years sometimes. My answer, and I didn't get into it with him, is, well, then so fucking what? Right? Because you are looking for something to click immediately doesn't justify putting out information that's potentially false just to gain an audience.
Right. And responsible journalism, well, back in the day when responsible journalism, you would need not only a witness account, but you'd need a second witness account that corroborated it, or significant circumstantial evidence that corroborated the witness's account. Even one, as I say, one witness's account back in the day of responsible journalism was insufficient to go forward with the story. Now, folks, try and replicate that in your own mind. Don't even believe that it's, likely to be the case until you have corroborated evidence from multiple sources. Until you have that, you are irresponsible in assuming anything. If I say to you, I have 3 eucalyptus trees in my backyard, I have no reason, obviously, to lie about that. You might just in a conversation assume that. But if it became important or controversial and somebody said, no, Jim, you do not have 3 eucalyptus trees in your backyard, the position you'd have to take until you had, I sent you photographs or physical evidence of the eucalyptus trees in my backyard, you'd have to say, gosh, I don't know. This guy says one thing, this guy says another thing. It still doesn't establish it. And no, before you publicly start announcing things, you better tell us what your sources are, and you better tell us what your corroboration of that source is, or why does anyone have any reason to believe it in the first place?
Awesome, Jim. Okay, so tell the people where they can find you, and then go tell Rozzy I said hello and enjoy all his money.
Okay, I will. And by the way, I did not call Mark Pellegrino a ginger.
It's on the record, Jim. You're delving into the past now.
Jim Valliant, Facebook, James Stevens Valliant. I'm there almost every day answering questions. Please hit me up.
Thanks, Jim. I'll talk to you later.
Take care.
Well, that was great to have Jim here. Jim is wonderful. Jim is a very astute observer and very much understands epistemology, which is why I wanted him on here. So I just, is there anybody else, more fuck you money? Yes, Alan Thomas. Anybody else want to comment on this before I move on to something else? I got to find my stuff. Doesn't appear that anybody else has anything to say. So there's an article that I read today in the Daily Economy, and the article is titled, not entitled, titled, "Populist Rage Against Credit Cards Will Backfire on Consumers." So why would this be the case? And now the lens that I always like to look through whenever we're discussing public policy is two. One is, well, Alan Rozzy is not American, so that may be why he doesn't want to contribute to the American Capitalist Party. I don't know. Maybe we can get him on and ask him. But the first thing is, does a policy violate anybody's rights? And even if it doesn't, then my next question would be, does this policy produce the results that its advocates want? So it keeps being proposed, which means it's probably going to pass at some point, in my opinion, that they put a limit on credit card interest. I believe it's 10% that they're saying. And the idea is this is going to protect people. It's going to protect people from predatory interest rates, that sort of thing. So what happens? Well, the reason, a credit card company will charge exorbitant rates, just like a lender will, on somebody that's a high risk. Because if the thing is, if you take in, say, 10 people that are very high risk, but you're charging them all very high rates, if a few of them default on the loan or on the credit card, you're still going to end up making money because of the high rates. So what happens? If they put a cap on rates, you're going to end up, credit card companies are not going to take the risk of lending to high-risk borrowers, of issuing credit cards to these folks. So what they're going to do is just not give out as many credit cards. So you're going to have people, consumers, the poor, who are usually the ones that are wanted to be helped by these policies, who can't get credit. If they can't get credit, they can't make purchases. They can't do the type of things that they want to do. So the effects are not going to be what the advocates want, but it's also a wicked rights violation. It's interfering in the contracts of people. It's telling people, it's using force to preclude voluntary parties from contracting with each other. So if you are going to use force to stop people from agreeing with each other, who the hell are you? What makes you the arbiter? What makes you, as the government or as Josh Hawley, think that you're the one that can properly judge what these contracts should be? Nobody's rights are getting violated by these contracts. They're voluntary, and all the parties think that they're benefiting. Otherwise, they wouldn't get into it. And that's, I think, what a lot of opponents of capitalism miss, is that if a trade takes place, it only takes place because the parties to the trade believe that they're going to be better off after the trade than they were before the trade. Otherwise, they wouldn't make the trade. So in this situation, to the consumer, the exorbitant, or whatever we judge to be high interest rate that they're getting is worth it because they need the credit. Also, the profit that the credit card company is going to make, they judge is worth the risk that the person is going to default. These are voluntary transactions. The government has absolutely no freaking business in there getting involved in that. And if anybody wants to comment on that, and by the way, if anybody wants to ask any questions, feel free. It would be a enormous help to me anyways. Let me see what else we got here. So there was this, President Trump yesterday, or was it yesterday? I think so, had dinner with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And Netanyahu said he had a gift for the president. It's a written nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. And Netanyahu says he's forging peace as we speak in one country, in one region after the other. Netanyahu said of Trump, "Thank you very much." And then Trump says, "Thank you very much. This I didn't know." Wow. I think this is so damn ridiculous because it's so obvious to any person with a half a brain that Netanyahu is kissing Trump's ass in order to procure favor from Trump. Anybody knows Trump loves praise. So we've got this problem now. We've got this president that is so easily influenced by praise because he has to have his fragile ego soothed. And we've got a foreign leader willing to cater to that ego in order to procure benefits from our president. This is so ridiculous on so many levels. It just drives me batty. And what drives me even battier is how people don't see that that's what's going on. So, any comments on this? Do you think that it's okay for a foreign leader to so blatantly kiss the ass of our president in order to get benefits? Let's see. Scott says that Islam generally sees charging any interest as evil. Yes, that's very true, Scott. They do. They think it's all usury. They're talking too about, there was a link for a book in the article that I posted yesterday, and evidently the link doesn't actually bring people to the book. So you have to go and do an end around, maybe look up the book. But I know that it's still, you can still find it. But back to this thing, Trump also, in regard to this Ukraine thing, said, Putin's being a jerk. Listen, I'm all for being against Putin, but we ought not to base our foreign policy on whether a foreign leader is a jerk or not. That seems a bit obscene to me, but that's what we have in the White House right now. The last guy couldn't put two sentences together in his meetings with foreign leaders. This guy we have just wants his ego shined by foreign leaders. I remember Obama telling what's his name there, telling Putin, after I get elected, after the election, I'll be able to do, work with you a little bit more. obviously saying that he couldn't do it then because it would influence the election, which of course is paramount to all else, their pursuit of power. Scott, I'm sorry. They're not just showing loyalty to the U.S. when they come and say, oh, Mr. Trump, we have nominated you for the Peace Prize. Everybody knows that Trump wants to be known as the peacemaker. And he might have been talking to Medvedev, Scott says. You might be right about Obama. I'm not positive, but you might be correct. But I just can't. I can't fathom that this is anything but just blatant ass kissing on the part of Netanyahu, who, by the way, I don't think has been serving his countrymen very well. Let's see if we got something else that we can talk about before we conclude. There's an article here about from Fee, the rise of the influencer trust. So why do people trust these influencers? And this kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier in relation to the Epstein stuff. And the author of the article does a very good job of explaining why people have come to trust or distrust rather the mainstream institutions, the government, the mainstream media, etc. They've been unreliable. They've sometimes outright lied. I get all that. Where the author, I think, puts too much faith in the market of ideas. And, as a very pro-capitalist person, I'm not Pollyanna about it. I don't think that information competition necessarily leads to information that's true. What the author said is that if an influencer gets the reputation for not telling the truth, then that influencer loses credibility. The problem is that many of these influencers simply tell their audiences what they want to hear. And so when you're telling them what they want to hear, any contrary evidence often gets dismissed. So the influencer can never get exposed for being untruthful or being a liar. That said, I certainly don't think there should be any regulation or any prohibitions on the influencer class. I just think that expecting competition to make sure that we get that the true information wins out is a little bit too beyond optimistic. I would say it's actually naive, in fact. All right. Scott says that Netanyahu and Trump, I think he's referring to Netanyahu, are old friends. Well, sure, except for when Netanyahu congratulated Biden for winning the election. Then, Trump, of course, had a hissy fit. All right. Does anybody have any questions before I absolutely have to cut this short? Because I'm running out of things to say, folks. I got to be honest with you. It is not easy to carry a monologue for an hour here. Scott says he did that to protect Israel. Yes, Scott, the point is that Trump was offended by it, that Trump was angry. If somebody does something, it's such a small thing, but yet Trump got very upset about it. That's not how good friends treat each other, not how old friends treat each other. I know he got over it. So is there any questions? Do we have any questions? Scott wants to, Mike, you still didn't send me a reading list from Lee. Okay, Lee, let me tell you right now so that I don't have to type out a reading list because I hate typing. I really, really, really do. So what we need you to do, Leah, if you want to read, I'd recommend 3 books that I think will be great. And if you read these 3, then I'll tell you of some others. I would recommend reading The Law by Frédéric Bastiat. I would recommend reading Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And I would recommend reading Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal by Ayn Rand. So you have The Law by Frédéric Bastiat, Economics in One Lesson by Hazlitt, and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal by Ayn Rand. The book by Ayn Rand actually has many essays in there that aren't even by her. Alan Greenspan at the time was very much in the inner objectivist circle, and he has some great essays in there about the gold standard, about antitrust, about integrity that are wonderful. Robert Hessen wrote some articles. Nathaniel Brandon's got some great stuff. Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal is a great book. Scott says solid pick. So Scott can be right, folks. Scott Schiff is right. You've heard it here. On the Capitalist Corner, Scott Schiff is actually correct. Alan Thomas says the DHS saying in LA yesterday, we need to get used to their presence because actions like yesterday will continue. I'm not a fan of the Department of Homeland Security being around us. I think the folks that are craving for security may end up getting more than they bargained for. I used to often say while I was in prison, I would much rather be on the street living under a bridge than be in prison where I was totally secure. I also would recommend, by the way, there's a great essay by Leonard Reed called I Pencil that is fantastic for sort of an introductory to how capitalist markets work. And let me just say, if you are looking, Lee, if anybody is looking for self-improvement or gaining knowledge about yourself, self-understanding, I would still highly recommend The Psychology of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. Great book. He, of course, is persona non grata in most objectivist circles, but it's important to note that Ayn Rand herself never removed his essays from her books. And The Psychology of Self-Esteem is freaking great. I'd also recommend How to Raise Your Self-Esteem with the Art of Rational Thinking, or no, what's the name of the book now? The Art of Living Consciously, The Art of Romantic Love by Nathaniel Branden are also very, very good. Alan Thomas says self-improvement is masturbation. A little, I don't really know how to comment on that, Alan. Any thoughts from the audience? I don't know, Alan. That's a little strange, but hey, to each his own, you know? I'm a big fan of the self-improvement genre. There, of course, are a lot of fakes and frauds out there, but there's also a lot of solid stuff. Race Jacobson calls Nathaniel Branden some very mean names here. So there's that. Okay, folks, I am going to wrap this up for the day. Please be on the lookout for my interview coming up with Andrew Bernstein. Well, he will be interviewing me on my show, The Rational Egoist. If you aren't already subscribed to The Rational Egoist, then I suggest that you do so. Alan Thomas brought up Ozzy Osbourne. I will talk about Ozzy Osbourne for a few minutes. I started listening to Ozzy Osbourne, no joke, 5 years old. A friend of my mother had a son. He was, I think, 17 or 18 at the time. Big Ozzy fan. He got me into Ozzy. I love Ozzy. I think Ozzy's music is absolutely fantastic. I don't know, it doesn't really fit the capitalist theme, but it's still, in my view, is wonderful. 76 years old. He's still been putting out music. He's going to retire, at least he says so. I think it's the amazing thing with Ozzy that I've always found nutty is when he sings, I can understand him perfectly, but you can't understand what the hell he's talking about when he has a conversation. Very bizarre, but clearly a genius musician. I also never knew that he got thrown out of Black Sabbath. I just found that out yesterday reading an article, and I thought I would have known most of stuff about Ozzy, but they actually tossed him out. I thought he just left the band because he wanted to pursue a solo career. Evidently not. Greg Lewis recommends 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I would also recommend that. The quadrants are great. It's a great book. Great stuff. All right, folks, I am getting out of here. Remember, AmericanCapitalistParty.org. Check it out. Check us out. We're great. Remember that the opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily the opinions of the American Capitalist Party. Also, remember to check out my podcast, The Rational Egoist. And finally, remember to always check your premises. Thank you. Oh!